There's a quiet sadness that millions of people carry without ever speaking about it. It isn't the pain of being alone. It is the pain of believing that love must always be earned. Some spend years trying to become more attractive. Others work harder, speak softer, sacrifice more, or pretend to be someone they are not. Not because they enjoy the performance, but because somewhere along the way they began to believe one simple idea: if I become enough, someone will finally choose me. At first, the belief seems harmless. It pushes you to improve, to be kinder, to be more successful, to become a better version of yourself. But slowly, without noticing, self improvement becomes self rejection. Every achievement quietly whispers the same question: is this enough now? You lose weight, still not enough. You earn more money, still not enough. You become more understanding, more patient, more available. And yet, the feeling remains because the hunger was never outside you. It was inside the story you had been telling yourself. Imagine standing beside a well with a bucket that has a hole in its bottom. No matter how many times you lower it into the water, no matter how much effort you make, by the time you lift it back to the surface, it is empty again. This is what chasing love often feels like. Not because love is impossible, but because we keep trying to fill an emptiness that cannot be filled from the outside. The tragedy is not that people fail to find love. The tragedy is that many people stop recognizing themselves in the process of searching for it. They become whoever they think another person wants. They laugh at jokes they don't find funny. They apologize for having needs. They shrink their dreams to fit someone else's expectations. Little by little, they disappear. Yet they call it love. Perhaps you felt this before, waiting for a message that never arrived, reading the same conversation again and again, hoping to discover a hidden meaning, checking your phone every few minutes, wondering whether silence means rejection, whether distance means you are never enough. The mind begins writing stories. If they truly cared, they would have replied, maybe I said something wrong. Perhaps I'm simply not lovable. Notice how quickly one unanswered message becomes a judgment about your entire worth. The event lasted only a moment. The story could last for years. We often believe we are chasing another person, but if we look honestly, we are usually chasing something much deeper: certainty, validation, the feeling that someone else's love will finally prove we are enough. And that is where the pursuit quietly becomes a prison. Because anything that must constantly be chased can never truly give rest. Real love has never been a trophy waiting at the end of exhaustion. It has never demanded that you abandon yourself in order to deserve it. Nearly a century ago, a Japanese philosopher began asking a question that sounds almost impossible in a world obsessed with proving, achieving, and becoming. What if the deepest relationships are not built by trying harder to be loved, but by first learning to stop searching for yourself in the eyes of another? And perhaps that is where our journey truly begins. Perhaps that is why so many relationships begin with hope and slowly become negotiations, not because people stop loving each other, but because they begin measuring love. Who texted first? Who cared more? Who sacrificed more? Who apologized first? Without realizing it, love quietly becomes a transaction. I gave you this, so why didn't you give me that? The heart keeps score. and every relationship slowly turns into an invisible balance sheet. But love has never understood mathematics. It has never grown because someone counted more carefully. Imagine trying to hold water in your hands. The tighter you squeeze, the faster it slips through your fingers. Love often behaves in the same quiet way. The more desperately we try to possess it, the less alive it becomes. At first, we believe we're protecting the relationship, checking where they are, wondering who they're with, waiting anxiously for another message, wanting reassurance, wanting certainty, wanting proof. It all feels like love, but perhaps it is something else wearing love's face. Fear. Fear has an extraordinary ability to disguise itself. Sometimes it calls itself devotion. Sometimes it calls itself loyalty. Sometimes it even calls itself romance. Yet beneath every demand lies the same quiet question: please don't leave me. There's nothing shameful about this fear. Every human heart has known it. The fear of being forgotten, the fear of not being chosen, the fear that someone will one day discover we are less remarkable than they first believed. But fear makes a difficult companion for love, because fear always asks, how do I keep this? Love quietly asks, how do I truly see this person? Those are not the same question. One seeks ownership, the other seeks understanding. Have you ever noticed how much suffering comes not from what another person actually does, but from what we imagine they might do? A delayed reply becomes rejection. A quiet evening becomes emotional distance. One disagreement becomes evidence that the relationship is falling apart. The mind begins writing scenes that reality has not yet performed. And before long, we're no longer responding to the person in front of us. We're responding to the story inside our own heads. It is remarkable how often we fall in love with an idea, not the person, the idea, the version of them we hoped they would become, the future we imagined together, the conversations that never happened, the promises they never made. When reality finally arrives, we call it disappointment. But perhaps what disappointed us was never reality, only expectation. Some of the deepest heartbreaks are not caused by losing someone. They are caused by losing the future we secretly built around them, the life we rehearsed 1,000 times inside our imagination, the home we decorated, the mornings we pictured, the words we hoped to hear. When those dreams disappear, it feels as though part of us disappears with them. Yet perhaps it was never love that broke. Perhaps it was attachment to a story. Nearly a century ago, Nishida Kitarō explored a profoundly different way of seeing relationships. He believed that genuine encounter begins only when we stop placing our own ideas between ourselves and reality. The moment we stop asking, how can this person complete me? We become capable of asking a far quieter question: who is this person beyond my expectations? That question changes everything because love no longer becomes a search for someone to fill our emptiness. It becomes an invitation to truly meet another human being, not the version we imagined, not the version we hoped to create, but the person standing quietly before us. Perhaps the greatest obstacle to love has never been another person. Perhaps it has always been the stories we place between ourselves and them. And if those stories can keep us from seeing another person clearly, could they also be preventing us from seeing ourselves? That is the question we must now face, and perhaps That is where the deepest misunderstanding begins. We spend so much of our lives trying to be loved that we rarely stop to ask what love actually is. Is it excitement, possession, constant attention, or have we mistaken intensity for intimacy? Think about the beginning of almost every relationship. The conversations last for hours. Every notification brings excitement. Every meeting feels unforgettable. The future seems limitless. It feels as though love has finally arrived. But emotions, like seasons, were never meant to remain unchanged. The excitement softens, the mystery fades. Silence becomes more common than endless conversation, and suddenly the mind grows restless. Something is wrong. They've changed. Maybe they don't love me anymore. But what if nothing is wrong? What if the mind simply mistakes calmness for absence? A fire burns brightly in the beginning. Eventually, it becomes glowing embers. The warmth remains. Only the flames have changed. Yet many people spend their lives searching for flames, while overlooking the quiet warmth that was always the deeper expression of love. Perhaps this is why so many beautiful relationships slowly collapse, not because love disappeared, but because expectation quietly replaced presence. We begin comparing today's ordinary moments with yesterday's extraordinary ones. And comparison has a way of stealing gratitude from what is still here. The mind is constantly asking for proof. If they love me, they should finish the sentence however you like. Call more often. Understand me without explanation. Never disappoint me. Always make me feel important. Notice how easily love becomes a list of conditions. The list grows longer every year. Soon, no human being could ever satisfy it because the list was never really about another person. It was written by our own fears. Fear always asks for guarantees. Love has never been able to give them. No relationship can promise that life will never hurt you. No person can remove every insecurity you've carried since childhood. No amount of affection can permanently silence a mind that has learned to doubt its own worth. And yet, we often ask another human being to accomplish exactly that. We hand them responsibilities that never belong to them. Make me feel complete. Make me feel safe forever. Never let me feel lonely again. It is a beautiful dream, but it is far too heavy for any human heart to carry. Imagine planting a tree. Every morning, you dig it up to check whether the roots are growing. By evening, you bury it again. The next day, you repeat the process. No matter how much you care about the tree, it will never flourish. Not because it lacked love, but because it was never given the quiet trust it needed to grow. Relationships are much the same. Constant reassurance cannot replace trust. Constant control cannot create closeness. Constant fear cannot become intimacy. Sometimes the greatest act of love is not holding tighter, but allowing another person the freedom to simply be. Nearly a century ago, Nishida Kitarō suggested that reality is encountered most deeply when we stop forcing it to fit our expectations. Perhaps this is also true of love. The moment we stop trying to reshape another person into the image we've created, we finally begin meeting them as they are, not as a solution to our loneliness, not as proof of our worth, not as the missing piece of ourselves, but as another human being, equally fragile, equally uncertain, equally searching. Perhaps love has never asked us to possess another person. Perhaps it has only asked us to witness them completely, to see them without the constant noise of our own fears, without turning every silence into rejection, every disagreement into abandonment, every imperfection into disappointment. Because when we truly see another person, something unexpected begins to happen. For the first time, we begin seeing ourselves more clearly as well. And it is there, in that quiet meeting between two people who no longer need to chase, control, or prove anything, that love starts becoming something entirely different from what the mind had imagined all along. And perhaps this is the moment where everything quietly begins to change. Not because the world suddenly becomes kinder, not because people stop living, not because heartbreak disappears, but because, for the first time, we begin to notice the difference between loving someone and needing someone. At first, the difference seems almost invisible. Both can make your heart race. Both can fill your thoughts from morning until night. Both can leave you awake long after the world has fallen asleep. Yet beneath the surface, they are moving in opposite directions. Need asks, "Don't leave me." Love whispers, "I hope you become fully yourself." Need clings. Love allows. Need fears change. Love understands that everything alive must change. Perhaps this is why so many people mistake attachment for love. Attachment feels urgent. It demands answers. It fears silence. It constantly searches for reassurance. Love, on the other hand, rarely announces itself. It is often found in the quiet moments no one notices. Preparing tea for someone without expecting gratitude. Listening without waiting for your turn to speak. Remaining present during another person's pain instead of trying to fix it. The world celebrates grand gestures. Love often lives inside ordinary ones. Imagine standing beneath a clear night sky. You don't try to own the stars. You don't become anxious because the moon belongs to everyone. You simply stand there and allow yourself to be moved by their presence. Perhaps love was always meant to feel more like admiration than possession. Some of the most beautiful things in life can never be owned. A sunrise, the sound of rain against a window, the scent of the earth after a storm, the laughter of a child, the stillness of an early morning. The more we try to possess these moments, the more quickly they disappear. Yet when we simply receive them, they leave something permanent within us. Maybe people are not so different. One of the quiet tragedies of modern life is that we often meet others through the lens of our own loneliness. We don't ask, "Who are you?" We silently ask, "Can you rescue me from myself?" It is an impossible question, but eventually, the silence we tried to escape begins speaking again, not because love failed, but because we expected another person to complete the journey only we could walk. Nearly a century ago, Nishida Kitarō described reality as something that reveals itself only when we stop placing ourselves at the center of every experience. Perhaps love follows the same quiet principle. As long as every relationship revolves around our fears, our expectations, our need to be validated, we never truly encounter the other person. We only encounter our own reflection. How often have we mistaken that reflection for intimacy? How often have we asked someone to become the answer to questions they never created, to heal wounds they never caused, to silence doubts that existed long before they entered our lives? Love was never meant to become another name for emotional dependence. It is something gentler, something freer. It asks us to meet another human being without trying to reshape them into our personal source of happiness, to celebrate who they are not who we need them to become. There is a quiet freedom in loving this way, the freedom to appreciate without possessing, to care without controlling, to remain open without demanding guarantees. Ironically, it is often only when we stop chasing love that love finally has room to breathe, like a bird that lands only on an open hand. It cannot remain where it feels trapped. Perhaps the deepest expression of love is not found in holding on. Perhaps it is found in creating a space where both people are free to grow, free to change, and free to remain completely themselves. Because when love no longer becomes an attempt to fill an inner emptiness, something extraordinary begins to happen. The relationship changes, not because the other person became different, but because the one who was searching has quietly become whole. And when wholeness replaces longing, love is no longer something we chase. It becomes something we naturally share. And perhaps that is the quiet paradox we spend most of our lives trying to understand. The moment we stop asking another person to complete us, we become capable of loving them completely. It sounds almost backwards. The world tells us that love begins when we find the right person. But perhaps love begins much earlier. Perhaps it begins the day we stop running away from ourselves. There is a reason loneliness feels so heavy. It is not always because no one is beside us. Sometimes it is because we have never learned how to sit peacefully in our own company. Silence becomes uncomfortable. An empty room feels unbearable. The absence of messages feels like proof that something is missing. So we fill every quiet moment with conversations, with distractions, with relationships, with the hope that another person's presence will rescue us from our own. Yet loneliness has a strange way of following us. It can sit beside us at a crowded dinner table. It can travel with us on holidays. It can even exist inside relationships where two people sleep only inches apart because loneliness is rarely the absence of people. More often, it is the absence of connection with ourselves. Imagine standing before a still lake at dawn. The water is so calm that it reflects the mountains perfectly. But the moment you begin studying the surface, the reflection disappears. The mountains never moved, only the water did. Our hearts are not so different. When they are constantly disturbed by fear, comparison, need, and expectation, we lose the ability to see clearly, not only the other person, but ourselves. This is why chasing love often leads us farther away from it. The more desperately we seek someone to tell us we are enough, the less we believe them when they finally do. A compliment lasts a moment, doubt returns the next day. The affection feels comforting until insecurity quietly asks for more. No amount of reassurance can satisfy a question that has never truly been answered within. Nearly a century ago, Nishida Kitarō wrote about encountering reality directly, before the mind divided everything into separate pieces. Perhaps love asks the same of us, to meet another person, not through the lens of fear, not through the memory of old heartbreak, not through the hope that they will repair what life has broken, but simply as they are. And perhaps that begins only when we are willing to meet ourselves in exactly the same way, without judgment, without comparison, without the endless project of becoming more acceptable. How much of your life has been spent trying to earn the right to be loved, trying to become more successful, more attractive, more interesting, more accomplished, as though love were a prize waiting at the end of perfection. But perfection has never introduced two hearts to one another. Presence has. A person who truly listens, a person who remains honest, a person who is fully there. These qualities are quiet. They rarely attract attention, yet they are the foundation upon which lasting love is built. Perhaps this is why the deepest relationships often feel surprisingly ordinary. There is less performance, less pretending, less exhaustion. Neither person is constantly trying to prove their worth. They simply share life, a morning walk, a cup of tea, a conversation after a difficult day, comfortable silence. The extraordinary slowly reveals itself inside the ordinary. And maybe that is what love has been trying to teach us all along. Not that someone else will complete our story, but that two whole stories can choose to walk beside one another, not because they fear being alone, but because they genuinely wish to share the journey. When love grows from that place, it no longer feels like chasing, it feels like breathing, natural, unforced, quiet, and in that quietness, something beautiful begins to emerge. For the first time, we stop asking whether another person loves us enough and begin asking a far more meaningful question. Can I love without fear? Because the answer to that question has the power to transform not only our relationships, but the very way we experience life itself. And perhaps that is where love quietly returns to its simplest form, not as something to possess, not as something to earn, but as a way of being. For most of our lives, we have been taught to ask one question: how do I find the right person? It sounds reasonable. Almost everyone asks it, yet very few stop to consider another question: who am I becoming while I search? Because every search changes the one who is searching. Some people become impatient, some become guarded, some stop believing in love altogether. Others begin settling for relationships that slowly ask them to abandon pieces of themselves, not because they are weak, but because loneliness can make almost any compromise appear reasonable. Little by little, the desire to be chosen becomes stronger than the desire to remain authentic, and without realizing it, we begin negotiating with our own soul. We say yes when our heart whispers no. We remain silent when honesty is needed. We laugh at words that quietly wound us. We accept affection that arrives only when it is convenient for someone else. We convince ourselves that this is what love requires. But love has never asked us to disappear. Only fear asks for that sacrifice. Imagine walking through a beautiful forest. The trees do not compete for the sunlight. The river does not hurry to reach the sea. The flowers do not bloom earlier because another flower blossomed yesterday. Everything grows according to its own nature, without comparison, without apology, without asking permission to exist. Human beings may be the only creatures who constantly believe they must become someone else before they deserve to be loved. We wait until we lose the weight, until we earn more money, until we become more successful, more confident, more interesting, as though love were patiently standing at the finish line, waiting for perfection to arrive. Yet perfection has never introduced two hearts. Presence has, honesty has, kindness has, the courage to be fully seen has. Nearly a century ago, Nishida Kitarō suggested that reality reveals itself most clearly when we stop forcing it to fit the images created by our minds. Perhaps relationships ask for the very same thing: to meet another person, without trying to reshape them, without asking them to heal every wound we carry, without expecting them to become the missing piece of an identity we have never fully accepted ourselves. The greatest gift we can offer another human being is not perfection, it is presence, to truly listen, to truly see, to remain beside them without immediately trying to solve, correct, or possess them. Because there is a quiet kind of love that asks for almost nothing. It does not demand constant proof. It does not panic when silence arrives. It does not measure affection by the number of messages sent each day. It understands something the anxious mind often forgets, that what is real does not need to be constantly defended. A mountain does not wake each morning wondering whether it still belongs to the earth. The ocean does not ask the waves to promise they will never leave. The sky never begs the clouds to remain forever. Everything beautiful exists because it is free to change. Perhaps love follows the same rhythm. The moment we stop treating another person like an answer, we finally begin hearing the questions their heart has been trying to ask. The moment we stop searching for constant reassurance, we become capable of offering genuine reassurance. The moment we stop chasing love, we discover that love was never running away. It was simply waiting for us to stop running from ourselves. And maybe that has been the quiet lesson hidden beneath every relationship, every goodbye, every longing, every heartbreak. Not that love is difficult to find, but that it becomes impossible to recognize while we are desperately trying to capture it. Because the deepest love does not arrive as excitement alone, it arrives as peace, as trust, as freedom, as two people walking beside one another, not because either one is incomplete, but because both have finally discovered that wholeness was never something another person could give. And when that realization settles gently into the heart, one final question remains. If love was never something to chase, then what has it been asking of us all along? And perhaps that has been the quiet invitation hidden beneath every moment of love we have ever experienced, not to become someone worthy of being loved, but to remember that love was never something that could be earned in the first place. From the day we are born, life begins teaching us conditions. Work hard enough, become successful enough, be attractive enough, be interesting enough, be useful enough. Slowly, almost without noticing, we begin carrying those conditions into our relationships. We stop asking whether someone sees us. Instead, we ask whether we have done enough to deserve being seen. The search becomes endless because enough is a destination that keeps moving. Every achievement creates another expectation. Every compliment demands another performance. Every relationship quietly becomes another examination we are afraid of failing. Perhaps that is why so many hearts remain tired, not because they have loved too much, but because they have spent years trying to prove they are worthy of love. Imagine a flower blooming in the middle of a quiet valley. It does not bloom because someone is watching. It does not ask whether the mountains approve. It does not compare its petals with the flowers growing beside it. It simply unfolds according to its own nature. Its beauty is not something it achieves, it is something it expresses. Perhaps the human heart was never meant to live so differently. Nearly a century ago, Nishida Kitarō pointed toward something remarkably simple. He believed that our deepest encounter with reality begins when we stop separating ourselves from life, when we stop standing outside every moment, judging it, measuring it, asking whether it is enough. The same may be true of love. Perhaps love is not something we manufacture. Perhaps it is something that naturally appears when fear no longer occupies all the space within us. Think about the moments in your life when you felt most deeply connected to another human being. It probably wasn't because someone bought the perfect gift or said exactly the right words. More often, it was something much quieter, a conversation that needed no performance, a hand held during a difficult season, someone sitting beside you without trying to fix your pain, a shared silence that somehow said everything words could not. These moments feel different because, for a little while, neither person is trying to become someone else. Nothing is being chased, nothing is being proven. There is only presence. And perhaps presence has always been the purest language of love. We often imagine that love transforms ordinary moments into extraordinary ones. But maybe the opposite is true. Maybe love teaches us that the ordinary was extraordinary all along. Morning sunlight falling across the kitchen table, the sound of familiar footsteps returning home, 2 cups of tea slowly growing cold because the conversation mattered more than the drink, the quiet comfort of knowing that nothing needs to be said. Life has a strange way of hiding its greatest treasures inside moments the world tells us to overlook. The mind is always searching for dramatic endings. Life quietly offers simple beginnings. Perhaps this is why the people who chase love the hardest often feel the farthest away from it. Their eyes are fixed on tomorrow, on finding, on becoming, on arriving. Meanwhile, love has been patiently waiting inside this very moment, inside the courage to be honest, inside the willingness to truly listen, inside the quiet decision to stop pretending, and perhaps inside the gentle acceptance of yourself. Because the relationship you build with your own heart becomes the atmosphere in which every other relationship must live. If you constantly wage war against yourself, no amount of affection from another person will finally bring peace. But when you begin meeting yourself with the same kindness you've spent years searching for in someone else, something extraordinary happens. You stop asking people to rescue you. You simply invite them to walk beside you. There's no desperation in that, no performance, no fear of being exposed, only gratitude, only openness, only the quiet understanding that love is not two incomplete people trying to become whole. It is two whole human beings choosing, day after day, to witness one another's journey with compassion. Perhaps that is why love cannot be chased, because everything worth chasing assumes distance, and love, in its deepest form, has never been about a distance. It has always been about presence, about arriving completely in this moment, completely in yourself, completely with another. Tomorrow, your mind may still tell you that you are not enough. It may ask you to compare, to impress, to seek approval, to run after affection as though your worth depends upon someone else's decision. Listen if you must, but do not confuse that voice with the truth. The deepest love has never belonged to the loudest voice inside your mind. It belongs to the quiet presence that asks for nothing, proves nothing, chases nothing, and yet somehow has enough room to embrace everything. Perhaps that is what Nishida Kitarō wanted us to discover. Not that love is waiting somewhere beyond us, but that the moment we stop searching for our value in another person's eyes, we become capable of seeing love as it has always been, not as a prize, not as a possession, not as proof that we are enough, but as the most natural expression of a heart that has finally come home to itself.